February this year, we commemorated the 80th anniversary of one of the most vile acts of the Second World War, the Banker Island Massacre, and its survival by Sister Vivian Bullwinkel. I now ask Alexander McLean and Remy Kochniev from Aspley State High School to deliver their student presentation on the massacre.
The commemoration of the end of a war serves as an opportunity for remembrances, for testimonials to soldiers winning battles despite overwhelming odds, for individual exploits of heroism and sacrifice, often rewarded with medals and monuments, for acknowledgement of the endurance and resolve of those captured and imprisoned in brutal conditions, for silent tribute to the young who go to war brimful of honour, often sadly never to return. However, the 2022 Battle for Australia ceremony represents an opportunity to remember the loss that 70 years ago represented one of the greatest tragedies of all time, the brutal murder of the innocent in rapid fire of war, and to acknowledge the victims of an ordeal so dark that the only light shed is these victims' own humanity and resolve, as occurred on the island of Bangka in the most brutal days of 1942. While thousands of Australians joined up in 1939 to 41 to defend hearth and home, to seek heroism and adventure in the Pacific as soldiers, sailors, pilots and ground crew, many joined a different corps, also seeking not to hurt, but to heal with the Australian Army Nursing Service. Young Australians like Sister Vivian Bullwinkel, who committed themselves to the care and treatment of unknown soldiers in an unfamiliar land, made their commitment to the same zeal, fortitude, and risks as those who sought to serve their country with shot and sword. Nursing in the Pacific War would involve risk, danger, and courage as much as any other serviceman, and for the 22 young women on the morning of February 16, 1942, the darkest side of war was to become their horrible reality. The realization that a remote war was becoming an imminent danger was forced upon many Australians in early 1942 as the Japanese juggernaut moved from mainland Asia into the islands of the Pacific. But for none was this more clear than those serving in Singapore, a place about to become the front line in a new conflict we now call the Battle for Australia. In the horror and chaos of the Japanese onslaught on Singapore Islands during February 12th, a handful of survivors made their way to the relative safety of a conscripted merchant vessel, the Vivian Brook, and steamed to the hopefully safer climes of the Dutch East Indies in the Ocean of Darkness. For the nurses and soldiers and civilians on board, relief was in short supply as that vessel and others were spotted by the efficiency and persistence of the enemy war machine. Some ships sunk, which left many survivors desperately swimming together for the islands of Bangka, a place few would survive and none would forget. As the soaked and exhausted survivors struggled ashore in the dawn of light in February 16th, the courage of Vivian Bullwinkel and her comrades came to the fore with the treating of injured and the preparation of a makeshift shelter. When officers made the grim decision to make the lonely trek to Montauk to offer a necessary surrender, it was Matron Neville Drummond and senior nurses like Sister Vivian Bullwinkel that responsibility for the care of the party was entrusted to. It was a responsibility they would not shirk, even at the expense of their lives. With practicality, selflessness and resolve expected of the most seasoned commander, it was Matron Drummond and Sister Vivian Bullwinkel and their colleagues who made the decision to send able-bodied civilians, women and children, away across the country to hopefully safer conditions. The thought that these nurses should also seek safety themselves was never considered, as the need to tend to the wounded was seen as more paramount. Under a hastily constructed Red Cross, these heroic and determined young Australians, who had already endured the carnage of battle firsthand, were about to experience war's brutality in its most nightmarish form. The arrival of the Japanese troops mid-morning may have brought half-formed hopes of relative relief to some of those stranded on this tiny beach amid an ocean-wide conflict. But the zeal for the empire and the cold efficiency of a victorious invasion outweighed any natural inclination in their captors towards humanity and compassion. For the wounded who could walk, there was a forced march, and for the unarmed and unthreatening nurses, a fate much worse has already been decided. After lining up and massacring the surviving soldiers by gun and bayonet on the shore, the Australian nurses who had crossed the sea, in the name of mercy and care, were marched into the water and blasted down without care or pause, in violation of every principle of the rules of war. 22 lives were lost in those waves, and more than 60 souls had already been slain on the shore. The illusion of war was an exercise in honour, and fair play died that morning amid the screams of those who came to preserve life, but were sacrificed by those who had little but disdain for it. Yet amid the dark cruelty of such an event, the triumphant side of human nature finds opportunities to shine through. For this inhuman massacre features players of the deepest humanity. British Private Patrick Kingsley, wounded and bleeding in the bush, who dragged wounded Vivian Bullwinkel, one of the scant survivors, to safety, and gave her aid and protection for 12 long days at the expense of his own life. Stoker Lloyd, who delivered Vivian to the relative safety of a POW camp and ensured amid the years of imprisonment to come that the crime of Banker Island committed by his captors would not remain a secret. And Sister Vivian Bullwinkel herself, who would survive an agonising shot to the sternum, endured terrifying days and nights on the run while treating the wounds of her comrades, and would later endure 3 years of horrific prison camp experiences, all the while driven to survive, to endure, and to make sure that the world knew what violations of decency and humanity that had taken place on that unmarked shore on February 16. In the years after World War II, Sister Vivian did not flag in her pursuit of the truth, testifying at war crime trials and fighting for the enormity of her experience to escape, being clouded by the fog of war. Neither the horror of her ordeal nor the bitterness of its fallout were able to deter Sister Bullwinkel from her dedication to offering the care and compassion she herself had been denied. For a further 30 years, she would be at the forefront of the treatment of wounded and returned servicemen, and in 1975, she would also be present at the end of another Southeast Asian conflict in Vietnam, where she once again served as a strong foundation on which refugees of war could rely on desperately needed aid and care. 70 years later, time, politics, and the confounding confusion of war still prevents us from possibly ever knowing the full truth of the crimes, brutality, and violation committed on that fatal morning on Banker Island. The event stands as a tragic reminder of the inhumanity and injustice that war can drive human nature to, where the most innocent and ill-deserving are often victims of the worst violence that human minds can conceive, and where the core nature of our values and beliefs seem to be shredded. However, it is through the selfless courage and persistence of individuals like Kingsley, Harris, Drummond, and Vivian Bullwinkel, who amid the grimmest, most hopeless darkness, retained the light that led them to the better part of their natures. They show how we can hope that even in the deepest despair, some still retain the ability to see their salvation, not in self-preservation, but in maintaining the needs of others, in life as well as in death. The ceremony today is a tribute to the courage of all the innocents sacrificed in war, those who lost their lives and those who have to carry the knowledge of the brutality they witnessed throughout the rest of their days. The pledge to preserve the memory of the fallen applies firmly to those who experienced the horrors of Baker Island, to acknowledge their sacrifice, to mourn their loss, to preserve their memory, and to ensure their story will be never lost to the past by inscribing their actions of the past in the hearts of the present.
Thank you. This is a poem in remembrance to the innocent lost on this distant shore. The waves are still where the anger once flowed. The shores bear witness to the scene of strife. The moon shines down on a field unhollowed, where the lonely sisters lost their life. They came to this place not to wound, but to heal. Not soldiers for fighting, but sisters to aid. But those they met, their purpose meant little. Now their blood meets the surf of this dusk-lit shore. Women of mercy met war on the beach. Their only armor was their purpose and pride. But empire building has scant time for feeling, and mercy and justice washed away with the tide. Alone altogether in the punishing dark, then huddled for comfort in the mid-morning haze. With the crushing of water, it is quickly all over, but the crime leaves this beachhead in a sorrowful daze. War makes men monsters, or the other way around. What war made this monster? What men cursed this ground? In the years that have passed, justice was meted. The campaign continues, that our conflicts may cease. But on this beach, in this moment is captured forever, the terrible crime of a war made on peace. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. We will now proceed with the laying of wreaths, and I ask Her Excellency and Professor Nemo if they would lay the first wreath, to be followed in the order that I call.